Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast. Now today, Aaron Peck, CEO of Mothership, is going to be joining me on the podcast, and that has to be one of the coolest names I've ever heard for a company. And they're revolutionizing the freight industry with an on-demand network of connected trucks and dashboards to streamline local freight operations. And I think the reason this is so important is because, let's face it, we all like ordering stuff. And let's be honest, we take a lot of that for granted, whether it be stuff we order online or maybe items we pick up in supermarkets. The events of the last few years have showed us how fragile the supply chain can be, and also the importance of these trucks that ensure that whatever item it is that you can think of right now will make it to your front door or inside your refrigerator. So I want to learn more about Mothership, especially because they raised $76 million in funding last May in a funding round, and Mothership is making significant strides in transforming the world of same-day delivery. Again, Amazon Prime has almost made that a standard expectation now, but other businesses need to be doing the same. So how do we do that? So today I'm going to invite you to join me in a conversation with Aaron, who's going to share his journey that also began in the music industry. So I want to learn more how he went from being a drummer in a rock band to the tech industry, the story behind that name, Mothership, the trends and opportunities in the freight and commerce industry, and much, much more. So buckle up and hold on tight, because no matter where you're listening in the world, I'm beaming your ears stateside so Aaron can share his story. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Aaron. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
I am Aaron Peck. I am the founder and CEO of Mothership. We are in the last mile freight space. So what that means is everything that kind of travels within 100, 150 miles, and it's the last time it's going to be on a truck.
That's an incredibly cool name as well. So I've got to find out more about how you got that name. But to begin with, can you share with the listeners how your background in the music industry, particularly with Interscope Records, actually influenced your decision to transition into the technology sector and build Mothership? It sounds like the origin story of all origin stories. But can you share that?
Yeah. Look, it turns out that like computers and technology, back in the 90s, like, if you're in junior high, isn't that cool with the girls. So you better learn how to play a sport or become a musician. I picked up the drums kind of early, and I was always into technology, right? So I was taking apart computers, I was fixing computers in the neighborhood, I was building websites for little businesses. I worked at the local computer store for free. I just told them, hey, if you buy me lunch, let me work here. I wasn't even old enough to work in a computer store. I wasn't old enough to have a job.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to I wanted to be around it all day. Like I was just obsessed with it. But like I said, like it's not a very social thing unless you consider like messages through AIM social. And so I picked up the drums, and music was kind of my second love at the time. And I became obsessed with the drums, just like, computers. So if I wasn't on my computer building a website, I was playing the drums. I took it really, really seriously, and ultimately, started a couple bands and had some success. I was really motivated to be successful in it. I just thought, look, if I'm going to spend this much time on something, I should try and be successful at it, right? Like take it all the way. Also some of the stuff that I had learned, like building websites, learning how to use Photoshop, Illustrator, all this stuff that I learned on the computer, even like navigating social media as it was just, coming about. That all translated into helping the bands out significantly, right? The band that eventually got signed to Interscope, we got signed before we played one show. We hadn't played one show yet. We were just a band that was blowing up on MySpace. And I attribute that to like just knowing how to navigate social media at the time, having good design, knowing how to communicate, right? Like, and by the way, like people like yourself are so much better at this now, like building an audience, right? But
Yeah.
back then, it was, we were figuring it out. And so I just applied all that, like designing our merch and beautiful website, streaming the music where and when we could. And that allowed us to take off without ever playing a show. And before we knew it, we signed a major label contract to Interscope, and we were on Warped Tour. And it was just like in an instant. One day I'm driving around in my car with my girlfriend listening to my favorite bands. The next day, literally like almost the next day, I'm on Warped Tour backstage passing my heroes. And one of my roadies looks over at me at the time, and like I'm a little shell-shocked, and he goes, "Whoa, you're one of them now." And I was like, "That's too fast," But that's the power of the internet. right? Like it would have taken so much longer. Anyone else got there through playing hundreds of shows, whatever. And here we are just catapulted to success on a major label contract because of the internet. So I think it made me even understand the power of it even more, right? Like I think it made me even more obsessed with tech, not less. And so, it kind of came around full circle. We started this company called Beat Deck with some friends of mine, and it was basically Moneyball for music. And we said, look, we think we can use data points on the internet to, specifically like the Twitter fire hose, and that we can point out artists that are kind of tipping way before anyone would realize it, and that we could seed that information to the record label so they can start with a development deal or just an all-out deal. We found some interesting people doing that. Like, I was in a studio with Post Malone before anyone knew who Post Malone was.
Wow.
So it was fun. But ultimately we realized through that venture that, hey, like there's only so many major labels that could, even if we got $1 million contract out of all of them, that only makes, we're only making $10 million a year. This isn't actually venture scale. Like I cannot go out in good faith and raise from investors saying like, this is a multi-billion-dollar public company. It's just not that. It's fun, but it's not that. And so, I end up, after that, starting a company called Skirt that was in the rental car space. It was rental cars delivered. So we would basically allow you to rent a car through the app in 60 seconds. We'd deliver it to you wherever you are, drop the keys in your hand. And when you were done, we'd pick them up from wherever you are. That was an incredibly fun business. It was acquired by Fair, which was like a short-term, they had raised billions of dollars, big company in LA. And after that was done, I had this, the part that I skipped here is that really, really early on in my life, I kind of grew up on the warehouse floor of my grandfather's company. My father ran packaging and shipping for my grandfather's company, which is Maglite, the flashlight company.
Yeah.
And growing up there, I used to take pallet jacks and ride them around like Razor scooters. I'd put myself on the conveyor belt in a box and ride all around the factory. And that got me really, really obsessed with freight. My dad ran all the shipping, so he was my hero. So I just thought it was the best thing in the world. And I had him teach me everything about it, and I became obsessed. So I carry that with me through my entire life. I even tried to convince him to be a truck driver. I was like, you need to leave this dead end job for grandpa and become a truck driver. We'll travel the country together. And he's like, dude, you have to go to school. And I was like, but why? Right? Like we could what we could see on the road together, father, son. And so, so I carried that with me forever. And when I started thinking about what I wanted to do next, even at Skirt, I was thinking, look, I love helping millennials rent cars in 60 seconds, but like, I want to change the world here. And this obsession with freight just kept with me. And I said, someone's got to solve some of these problems in freight. And if they do, it will really, really change the world. It'll be so much bigger than what I'm doing now. And so I basically got up in the room as we were kind of like exiting. And I said, hey, like, I'm going to start this freight thing. You guys don't know anything about freight. I can't pay you anything. Would you like to come work with me instead of going to Fair? And to their credit, they're like, yeah, we're going with you. Oh. And that's how Mothership was born.
What an amazing story. Absolutely love that. And I'll get some flashbacks there, hearing about you mention AIM and was it MySpace, etc. I've got to ask, what about A Thorn for Every Heart? That's the name of the band, right? Any reunion tours? Do you ever plan on going back to that?
Look, I think it's really hard to be like great at any one thing, much less like several things. Yeah. And so definitely chapters or phases in my life, right, where I become obsessed with one thing. I think everything like has led up to tech, and it's just all I think about every day. And I really want to change the world through technology. And I love music. I'm such a fan of music, and I still play the drums from time to time. But yeah, a reunion tour, I don't think is in the cards. And I think the guys in the band have got together and done some of that themselves. It's not in the cards for me. I have a company to run. I'm a CEO. Yeah. I have responsibilities, right? I have investors. Like this is serious business. We're trying to change the world here. And so I'm just 110% in on that. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, I mean, here in 2023, your passion for freight and commerce is evident in Mothership's success, of course. Can you tell a bit more about the story behind that passion? You said there about your father there and growing up. Is there anything else that motivated you to focus on this industry? And again, I've got to ask that question. What about the name? Where did that come from?
Like a lot of this stuff happens as you're growing up as a kid. I've talked to some founders before, like some folks that want to be founders, but they don't know exactly what idea they're going to focus on. Like I've talked to folks that are like, I'm dabbling in this industry because I think the total addressable market is huge. And like, I have a background in, I was a banking analyst and I've gone to a top tier school. And so like, I'm interested in founding a company now. And I've always found that a little strange, like a really hard way anyways to, I think, like, come up with a company you're going to found. Like, I do believe if you're going to do this stuff, it has to be like deeply burning inside you. Because if it's not, I think that the stuff gets really, really hard, right? Like it'll just be you sometimes at the end of the day and no one to talk to about that stuff. And that's true in every founder, CEO, right? It's like, and so I think if you don't have it deep down within inside you, it's something you have to solve. I think that, it's very easy to say, oh, we're just going to pivot. We're going to do something else or whatever, right? You have to have. So where does that come from? And I don't think it comes from like, it's not building up in your 20s and 30s. I do think it happens when you're a kid. There's some formative stuff that happens there. For me, my dad eventually did end up leaving Maglite and he started his own company. He invented a product and he was always messing with it at the kitchen table when I was a kid. And I said, hey, Dad, like, one day I'm like 18, 19 years old. I said, Dad, I'm sick of hearing about this invention of yours that you're going to take to market one day. Like, I'm just going to help you do this. And I had no interest in it. It's a gardening product. He didn't garden. I didn't garden. I was like, why did you come up with this thing? But it's smart. And he had a burning desire for it because it solved an issue that his mom had, my grandmother. And so he just was obsessed with like making this perfect thing. And so eventually I said, Dad, I'm going to take it to market. And so I didn't know how to sell, any garden products. End up at conferences of these like big trade shows where all these buyers from the big box stores, I demoed the product really sloppily. And like, to our surprise, they like purchased massive POs, like huge purchase orders right away. Like, and we had one prototype. So then we had to spin up and become a manufacturer in plastic injection molding, which we did in Southern California. And when we did that, I ended up also taking on one of the roles like my dad had at Maglite, right? Where I had to negotiate all of our trucking, our materials in, all the product out. I had all these relationships with these different trucking companies depending on where we were sending it and what we were picking up. And there's one problem that stood out to me above all. And it was this last mile bit with the local truckers. Like anytime I needed to move anything below 150 miles, forget about it. Like I became a full-blown trucking broker, couldn't even work on my business. And so I saw people solving, other parts of freight that are quite big, like full truckload, long distance, like everyone's in that game. And I thought like this last mile stuff where you want to move stuff around same day is so much harder. It's a real technology problem. And it just, that burning desire to solve that just stuck with me. And so I chased that down aggressively. Like I couldn't stop thinking about it. I just think freight is interesting in general, right? Like everything around you and I right now would be in a dirt field naked with nothing around us, right? Like everything around you came on a truck at some point and you don't even think about it. You don't think about it at all. You don't think about trucking one time per day, even though it brings you everything you have. And I think I actually think that's the cool part about it because it's just happening, right? And so like, it delivers everything that matters. It delivers innovation, all of the parts that go into innovating anything. SpaceX, like, we're going to go to Mars one day and trucks are going to deliver all those parts, right? It's like everything is delivered through trucking. And so I just see it as like the physical internet. And I think it's so cool. And if we can optimize it, we can truly put some tech behind this. We can make things move faster and cheaper. And I think we can actually stoke more innovation because you can take companies that previously like couldn't be in business because the transportation costs for the goods were too much. If you lower those by 10x and deliver it 11x faster, which we do, versus it's 11x faster than how things were done before, well, then what businesses can come about, right? So like I'm interested in being foundational to that kind of stuff. Mothership, the name. We previously had a different name. And we liked it, but we ended up finding out that like a bunch of other companies had it too in different spaces, and we were never going to get the .com. Like it just wasn't happening. We thought we were, and then we found out this big payments company that had raised tons of money had the .com. They were like squatting on it. And so we had to have like this come to Jesus moment. We're like, okay, like we got to change the name midstream here, it turns out. And we went back and forth on dozens of names, very startup-y names. And one day I came in the office and I just said, I'm going to say something that's be super polarizing, but let me just get it out. The name is Mothership. And half of the room stood up and was like, best name I've ever heard, started cheering. Half of the room was like, terrible. I don't want to work for a company with that name. And that was the exact reaction I was looking for, because I was like, love it or hate it, you can't forget it, right? I wanted it to be a bit polarizing, but then it was like, okay, how are you going to get the .com, right? And this, like .coms can be like $500,000 million. Turns out NBC Universal had the .com for like a movie or a show that they were going to do way back in the 90s, and they never used it. And we just so happened to have a friend who was a friend whose kids play together with the president of NBC Universal, and let's just say a very small exchange, like hundreds of dollars worth of goods were exchanged for an incredible .com. And that's when everyone was like, okay, this is fate. If we have this .com for that amount of money, then everyone else in the room came around. They're like, yeah, the name's Mothership. So, and I also just think it's like, look, I mean, a mothership is kind of like this central ship dispatching a bunch of other smaller ships to go do tasks. And like, it's perfect, right? Like it is such a good description of exactly what we're doing. So anyways, super long-winded answers to both those questions. I'm just passionate about both.
Yeah, no, I love the answer, especially because on this podcast, one of the reasons I always ask people to share their origin stories, the amount of times I hear stories of fate and serendipity. You're going down a certain road, you're planning everything, you think you've got everything worked out, and then life throws you a curveball. And then equally, Mothership, you stand there, half the room like it, half the room don't. But you come up with Mothership, but then even then, you've got to try and secure that domain name. But the universe throws somebody in that can make it happen as well. It's crazy, isn't it, when you sit down and think about it?
Yeah. It feels good to have that tailwind behind you sometimes, right? This stuff is really hard. When you get those little wins, it's great.
Yeah, 100%. And of course, now, before you came on the podcast, I was reading that you recently raised something like, I think it was $76 million in a funding round. Can you share with the listeners what that investment means to you, how it's impacted the company, and indeed your growth and development and plans for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we raised it from some incredible investors. Westcap and Lawrence Tosi led the round. Lawrence Tosi, for those of you that don't know, he was the former CFO of Blackstone and the former CFO of Airbnb. Just this really incredible character. One of the nicest people you ever meet in your life. Wicked smart. We had Benchmark and Bill Gurley in the round. They had led our Series A. Bill is, the best marketplace investor of all time, super engaged. So just incredible. And then Bo Capital and Rafi Syed. And that fund is, started by the founder of Tibco, and they own the Sacramento Kings, bunch of really cool firm. So we had great investors. We built a great board. What it means to us is that, we're allowed to chase down the mission, obviously. Look, the goal of our company or of any venture company shouldn't be just to endlessly raise more venture capital. At the end of the day, what it truly is, it's an opportunity to live another day and to flesh out your idea, right? And to chase it down aggressively. And so while, we do celebrate a little bit, I try not to get too excited about these funding rounds, because ultimately it's like, look, this is incremental. Team, like, we are marching towards an IPO. We want to become a public company that doesn't need venture capital to burn, right? You want to eventually turn into a mature company that's producing, incredible growth, that's at scale. And that honestly, grandma and grandpa are trading out of the IRA, or like folks are trading in their 401k, like you're building wealth for other folks, and you're just doing stuff on such a larger scale that some of the stuff that like you could never imagine at this stage is now coming true. You know, you're fully international. You have tens of thousands of employees. What can those folks do, right? And so I'm much more excited about, like, you know, then and the future than, you know, these incremental raises. So I think it's exciting, but it is a step on our way to take this company public and to operate at scale. What it does for businesses, I'm also excited about, right? Like, and we spoke about those businesses that allow us to move freight faster and more cheaply than ever before. And so what are they going to do? And also, like, all of the independent truckers that are on our platform, all of them are independents. We don't work with any kind of, like, you know, corporate trucking group. So, you know, we are helping folks feed their family, pay for healthcare, pay rent or a mortgage, you know, and that stuff makes me super excited. And so, you know, that's an American dream for all of those carriers, all of those truckers, right? They went out, took a risk, bought a truck, didn't know where the money's going to come from. They wanted to go out on their own. And I'd like to think we're helping them do that. So that gives me a lot of satisfaction as well. And so the money helps us, you know, do more of that. So we're just really excited to help our customers and to help more of these carriers. I mean, both sides really experience more of the American dream, grow their businesses on both sides. And then the team looks forward to eventually getting to an IPO and really, really scaling this thing so that it can be used by carriers and customers everywhere.
And of course, over the last few years, the success of Amazon Prime means that everybody, no matter where they're located in the world, have now got this expectation that when they order their stuff, they want it in 1 to 2 days max. 5 days ain't going to cut it. So every business is now having to follow suit. And I'm curious, what are the most significant trends that you've observed in the freight and commerce industry? And how is Mothership leveraging these trends to stay ahead of the competition as well?
Well, like, going back to the music stuff a little bit, right? Like, you remember when streaming music came about, right? And but before it was like really available for like $9 a month, it was like, what was it, right? It was like all the term, like the Pirate Bay, all that stuff. And like really, like, everyone was using that stuff because there wasn't a really good, you know, easy solution. Like, hey, just pay me $10 and listen to any song you ever want to listen to. But eventually, like, the world came around. And the music industry and streaming music, really, music listening, consolidated to just a handful of platforms. That's what tech does, right? You've seen this now in television as well, right? And movies. And so, you know, trucking right now, logistics in general, is on the early side of that. There's a lot of kind of tech-enabled legacy folks. They're trying to use technology to kind of bring themselves into what they see as a, you know, ever-changing environment. But the reality is like, you know, it's got to be core to your DNA, right? I think it's very hard and I applaud them for trying, and maybe there's a big opportunity to do it. But I think that this has to be core to your DNA. You have to start with the technology, not start with trucking and move backwards. And so the industry is just going through that transition right now. And then it's eventually going to go through to that consolidation, right? So I do think this, you know, it's really, really big industry. We're talking about like over $1 trillion in the US, right? So ultimately, I do think that there ends up being a few more players than music, you know, maybe call it 5 or 6, but it really gets that small. Like, it, you know, you get a handful of players. And who will those be, right? The trends are, you hit it right on the head. Like, who can, in the supply chain before it goes to the customer's door, like, who can help us move it through the distribution centers and from the manufacturer to the fulfillment facility, and from the fulfillment facility to directly to the post offices that are local in the zip code so they can drop it off the next, like, who can help with that stuff? And really, that stuff moves too fast for any legacy operations. You have to deploy a ton of tech. It's going to take a lot of money to do it. And in the beginning, in a lot of ways, it's not really cost efficient. Right? Like, it scales eventually, and you get the economies of scale and it starts to work. So what you're seeing is a huge leverage of tech, you know, dispatch and routing technologies, marketplace technologies, digital document, you know, like you can't even imagine the amount of paperwork that still goes into a shipment. Like, it'd blow your mind. Right? And so, API layer technologies, all this stuff, real-time tracking, all this stuff is coming kind of from different folks right now in different spaces. And so we're all kind of putting this together and picking a space that we're focusing on. And I think you end up with, 2 or 3 people that are in the full truckload space and they're the best. And those are going to be marketplaces. Like they just are. It's not going to be someone who owns trucks. And on the LTL side, the same thing is happening. That's less than truckload. That's stuff that's moving long distances, but it's not a lot. It's less than a full truckload of freight. And then on our side in the last mile space. But ultimately, what everyone is looking for is how are you going to help me speed up my supply chain while decreasing my costs, while giving me way more visibility and cutting out all of the admin work, right? So how do we deliver more without increasing the headcount, faster to our customers, increase those margins with more visibility, and easier to reconcile transactions. And technology provides all of those things. And so, look, those are the trends. The biggest trend I will say though, is that it is truly becoming a completely tech-driven marketplace, right? So independent truckers really stand to win here. And so I think that's the most exciting thing.
And on that side of things, you set out to change the world with technology, and we're currently in a world that is the age of the API. And when I was doing a bit of research on you, I was reading about the Mothership API and how that allows businesses to integrate local freight into their existing system seamlessly. Feels like a real game-changer moment, but can you elaborate on the benefits of that integration and how it helps companies streamline their operations, and also it obviously help local freight firms too?
Absolutely. Look, I think these supply chains are really complex. There's a lot of different pieces, right? You have the ship coming over from China in many cases. You have, in some cases you have stuff being manufactured here. Ultimately, it ends up in a distribution center, and then from there it moves around a lot of ways, right? It might go to e-commerce fulfillment. It might go to a retail store. So there's a bunch of ways it can move around. We are focused on last mile. And so if you're focused on last mile, you cannot expect everyone to come to your platform, use your UI. They need kind of a central way to handle all these different legs of the freight. And the reality is anyone trying to build that is building kind of a sloppy product, right? Like if you're building something that does everything for everyone, like you and I know, you never want to go to a restaurant with like 200 items on the menu. You're like, there's a lot of food here, but it's all terrible, right? Yeah. You want to go to a place that specializes. And that is true in tech and in freight specifically. And so we focus on the last mile. And so we have always said, we are excited when customers use our dashboard, our platform, and they're able to see the trucks in real time. And for many small businesses, that works really, really well. But as you scale up, we are part of a larger equation. And so we like the idea that you're able to tap into our AI and our API. And the way we think about that, and, me and my co-founder, Greg, said it from day one. We're like, a UI to book freight, last mile, same day. Yeah, this is crazy. This is going to be great. But what's even cooler than that is like Stripe for freight. Mm-hmm. And so we think that the value that we provide is like way below the UI. It's in the dispatch and routing and the access to unlimited trucks and a dynamic supply. You can have 20 trucks, working for you one day and go to 0 the next if you have no freight. Like, think about what that does to someone's cost structure, right? Like, that's incredible. They can scale up and scale down in an instant. And so, like, allowing them to be able to do that through an API, and you're just, computers are talking to each other and then these trucks are moving. This goes back to exactly what I said, which is the physical internet, right? It's the dispatch, it's the routing, it's the access to these trucks. And it's the ability to get that same day delivery and real-time tracking down to the foot, digital documentation, all transferred through an API in milliseconds. That's amazing.
And just listening to you today, not only are you a successful CEO in this industry, your passion for the industry really shines through. And I'm curious, what would your one key piece of advice be that you would pass on to an early stage founder that's maybe listening to our conversation today? Maybe they're looking to grow a business in the freight and commerce sector. Any pearls of wisdom that you would pass on to that person listening?
Yeah. That's an awesome question. It's just like so fun to think about. Like just stop planning everything, right? Like just stop. Like you need to say yes to a hell of a lot more things. Like seek out potential opportunities and chase them down a bit and say yes. Like it goes back to the serendipity we talked about earlier. Like you kind of want to open a lot of channels and see what like starts to resonate with you, because you need to find, like, ultimately these companies aren't built by one person. Like you need to find, in many cases, a co-founder or co-founders, and you need to find a group of people to work with. And that isn't found by saying, look, I have a mission. I'm going to do this one thing. That's it. I'm in it very regimented. I'm going to go to college. When I finish, I'm going to, go into banking. Then I'm going to found a company. Like you find very few founders where that's the story, like successful ones, right? Like, and so I just think you have to be willing, you have to put yourself out there. You have to stop planning a little bit. You'll have your interests, use those interests to go open up some doors, right? Find some people that are working in those areas, and also just seek out people that aren't duplicative in your talent set, right? So start to just build network, find friends, just put yourself out there in a way where you're probably uncomfortable, right? Like, one of my first co-founders in my first company, like we found each other through Twitter. Like we were just talking about music through Twitter. And like, we're like, hey, we should link up. And, several months later, like we had started a company, so that started this whole ride. Like we started Skirt together and raised a bunch of money there and had a successful outcome. So like, you have to be willing to just not go according to plan, but keep your passions and your interests, like keep those at the forefront and then navigate around those, right? And try and meet people that will help you in those areas. But it just is not going to go according to plan. You could build a roadmap of exactly how you're going to execute, and I just promise you 100% it's going to be nothing like that. So just be ready for that to change. Change is the only constant in this case. And just be open to meeting new people. Put yourself out there in an uncomfortable way.
Wow, absolutely love that. Perfect answer. Ticks all the boxes for me, and I completely agree with you saying that. Open up as many channels as you can. Say yes to as many opportunities. Chase them down, and then you are inviting serendipity your way, and maybe a few nods from the universe too. And I appreciate you probably can't share too much, but as the CEO of this rapidly growing company and Mothership, is there anything you can share about your future goals and how you envision the company evolving and helping shape the future of freight and the commerce industry with technology? Is there anything you can share around the road ahead? Excuse the pun.
No, I love it. Look, I mean, obviously, like I would be crazy if I didn't mention that we're dabbling in AI, but we're not doing it because it's trendy, and we're certainly not trying to raise any money on it or anything. Like me and my co-founder are like, at the end of the day, we're just hardcore nerds. Like when stuff like this comes about, we do our kind of daily tasks. We just did this recently, and then everyone left the office, and then we looked at each other. We're like, okay, you want to mess around with some AI stuff now? It's like a day before the board meeting. We stayed up all night, and like, so you just, if you're excited about this stuff, if you're really into technology, you're not going to do it because you think like attaching AI can raise more. Like we're going to do it because we think it's going to be fun, but ultimately we also think it just can have a massive impact on our business. So that's one thing. Another thing is, I would say, is I do believe like one of the things I hate the most about kind of the last mile space is furniture delivery. And it's like, if there's anything that you've probably experienced, everyone's probably experienced in these past couple of years, it's like, it's just horribly broken. I think we can fix that space. And so you said, hey, I don't want you to say too much. Obviously, I would just say it would be very rare for anyone to come on any podcast and say what I just said and then have anyone actually go execute on it. The idea are a dime a dozen. Execution is like, it's everything, right? So I believe I could probably give you the entire roadmap to the business and still no one would go out and execute on it but us. Right. And then after we're done, right, they're like, oh yeah, it's so obvious. Like all of these things super obvious right after they're done. And so, we'll execute aggressively, and I think we'll do it the right way. And so we'll win. But these are things that are personal to me, right? Like, I personally am super interested in AI, and I think there's incredible ways to bake that into freight. And then I personally have wrestled with furniture delivery this past couple of years in a way that gives me, again, that burning desire. And honestly, like, it's not sexy, right? Everyone else is out there like working on something super sexy, and here's Aaron with his team like, we need to solve furniture delivery, right? But those are the things that I find super interesting. Like, that's the stuff that actually matters and changes the world. And so I think there's a huge opportunity there, and I would love to see us in that space soon.
I love that. Your excitement, your passion, that burning desire to solve furniture delivery really comes across. And I think it's the fact that you find it fun and you enjoy doing it. And that's how people like yourself will change the world. And I'm curious as well, there is a real pressure on every single person to be in a state of continuous learning. Is there anything else you can share around how you self-educate and stay up to speed with the latest trends? Is it again just that passion and excitement for wanting to lift up the hood, take a look underneath and see how things work? Is it that, or is it something else?
Well, there is that, right? Like, I think growing up, my dad always had this kind of like, we would walk around the streets and he would point out stuff. He'd be like, look how poorly this is designed. Like, look how stupid this is. And he would explain how it could be made better. And I go, wow, he's right. And I think, as a kid, you always have this idea that the adults got everything taken care of, right? So you don't worry about anything. You're walking around and you're like, the lights turn on, the water runs, we're all safe. The adults have it. And as a kid, that feels really safe. As you grow up, I think a lot of people grow up and they still think someone else is taking care of things. And they don't realize that burden is now on you and I, right? Like, we are now the adults. The water runs because of us. And so I think that makes me look deeply into a lot of things, because I think, we have the responsibility of kind of shaping and running the world. And so I tend to go down a rabbit hole on so many things. But as far as, I think that's the answer, man.
Yeah, no, I completely rocked it. And I think it's a beautiful moment to end on. But before we do, for anyone listening, I feel that your passion and enthusiasm just rubbing off to people listening all around the world. Where's the best place for people to find you or your team online, or find out more about anything we talked about today? Where would you point everyone to?
Obviously mothership.com. I'm not active on Twitter. I'm a longtime listener, never time caller on Twitter. But Mike, I spend a lot of time there. I just find like they're just so I'm at Designing Aaron on Twitter. And I just find that that's an incredible place to, like, if you follow the right people, if you follow the innovators on there, you're just going to see, so many things surface that are interesting. And just lastly, you mentioned, where do you educate yourself? And I think that leads to that, right? Firstly, I would just say podcasts are incredible. Like, listen to smart people on podcasts, and they'll mention so many gems, like books, other podcasts you should listen to, places you should eat, things you should see, articles you should read. And so I find like that's a good place to stem off from and say, okay, now here are the things I'm going to go read and look into, and the articles I'm going to check out, etc. And so I'm constantly doing that. I listen to, audiobooks or podcasts in the shower. I do the same when I'm going to sleep. I take time to read every day. Certainly, I'm always trying to find something new. I pack every minute with that kind of stuff. So, I would just highly suggest that people find at least a few favorite podcasts of inspiring people, then take some of the recommendations they make you. And from there, you'll start to just fan out. Sorry, that was a little bit of a secondary answer to your last question. I realized I missed that part, and it's important to me. I mean, we're on a podcast right now, and I didn't even mention it, and it's literally like my number one source. So yeah.
It's so important. I'm glad we managed to get that in there. And I will add links to all the places where people can find you and your team, etc. So that is already covered. And although this is a tech podcast, and every day we talk about tech trends and the technology or the businesses that are solving real problems, one of the main reasons I record this every day is those origin stories of the people that are solving the problems, changing the world with technology. And I love for you how it began by previously being signed to Interscope Records, playing the drums in a band, man, and then the story behind your passion for freight and commerce, for technology, how you love to geek out, and what made you start Mothership, and how now you're changing the world through technology. That is the stuff we don't get to hear about enough. I think all too often we celebrate the success at the top of the summit, but not the climb up that long mountain and those 10-year overnight success stories. But just thank you so much, Aaron, for sharing your story today.
All right. Thank you so much, Neil. I appreciate it.
Wow, that episode had it all, didn't it? From that story of being a drummer in a rock band to entering the tech industry to the name not being available. And I love that moment of serendipity where he stood up and said, Mothership. Half the room hated it, half the room liked it. But guess what? A big studio had that. They were going to make a film called Mothership. But through a friend of a friend, he was able to get it. Call it fate, call it serendipity. But stories like that are the reason that I record this podcast every single day. And I would say that is the biggest thing that I've learned in 2,400 interviews, the role of serendipity and fate and the universe giving us all a little nudge in the right direction. We just need to have our eyes open and be open to those opportunities and chase them down, as Aaron said. So a big thank you to Aaron for joining us and sharing his insights, his story, and also insights from the freight industry, the importance of technology and the rise of independent truckers. I think it's fascinating to hear how innovative companies like Mothership are really making a difference in the world by solving complex problems with technology. So if you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast platform. Share this episode with your friends and colleagues if you think they'll like it. And I'll join you again bright and early tomorrow morning for another episode where I will try and bring you more tech insights, business insights, and inspiring stories from industry leaders. But thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.